Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's early Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up on Float Plane, Lego Lars has a non-retro related question. I've now and then mentioned that I'm a big football fan, and since the 2024 NFL season's underway, they were wondering if I play fantasy football. If so, what type of league am I in, and how's my season going so far? So I love fun questions like this. I guess a couple of things. First of all, we're talking about American NFL football, not the one you kick with your feet that we call soccer. I like soccer a lot as well, but I'm a massive, massive football fan. Unfortunately, though, this season, I don't know if I'm really even going to be able to catch a lot of games. I got a ton of stuff going on, and I'm so far behind on everything that I didn't even watch football last week, which is weird. Second week of the season, I'm usually glued to the TV with a beer in my hand and a pizza on the way, but life happens sometimes. Also, this is the first year in many years that I haven't bought NFL Sunday ticket, mostly because of the craziness, but also because they jacked the price up to be insane. I don't know how they expect that normal people could afford that on a regular basis. But to answer your question, no, I have never played fantasy football. I've always enjoyed it for the games itself, and I don't gamble at all, which some people get really mad when I say that. Like, fantasy football is not gambling. Like, it's whatever. If it isn't to you, that's fine. I'm not looking down on anybody. It's just gambling's like the only bad thing that I've never enjoyed. Every other thing you're not supposed to do, I really like doing usually. But yeah, I had no enjoyment. I remember, I think I was like 11, and I remember losing like $20, thinking like I was gonna keep gambling and make 100 and buy a new video game or something. And I was just like, ever since then, I was like, I could have been $20 towards that video game, and I just threw it away, and I never gambled again. Only with my life when I was drag racing and stuff like that, but not with money. So yeah, I never got into it. And I also never had the time to get into fantasy football because it wasn't even just the money thing. I know you could join free leagues and still do it just for the competition and the fun, but that takes a lot of effort to really get right. And one of the things that I most love about watching football is I don't have to put any effort into it. I'm kind of a, play hard, work hard type of person. So for me to find something I could do to just sit down and sink into a couch and enjoy it, that especially if I get to do it with a bunch of friends, that's important to me. So if it became a lot of work, it would just become something else I obsessed over, like every one of the higher production videos that you see. So yeah, and sorry, my answer was kind of a bummer. Last year, I probably would have given you a really upbeat, happy version of how much I love football and, walked through my setup again and stuff like that. But this year is kind of a bummer. So, no fantasy football ever, and I hope I get to watch some more games this year. Of course, I know it's getting a little tiring watching the Giants lose all the time, every week. If you're a sports fan, you understand what I mean. Even if you don't watch football, you get it. But anyway, cool question. Thanks, Lars. Keep asking the weird ones. I always enjoy these. Next up, moving on to Patreon, Lewis from Zez Retro had a possible solution for anybody looking for custom cables. Eduard, I'm so sorry. Everybody knows how bad I am at pronouncing names. It's never intentional. I try to get it right. But there is somebody in Europe that might be able to make one for you. He's based out of Albania, which is good for anybody in the EU, but he does ship to the US. So if anybody was looking for custom cables in the short term, Lewis has been trying out those cables for a while. I've been seeing his posts on social media about it, and they all seem to be great. So good to know other people are dipping their hat in, and hopefully we could have some more choices for people that need some crazy custom cables. Next up, Tony Escobar was wondering if there were any videos uploaded from Retro World Expo, because Tony was interested in checking out my panel and the one from Steve from RetroTechs. And yep, Chris, aka Doobsenhauer, was able to put both of those on his channel, and I really enjoyed both of the panels. I'll get to why I enjoyed mine in a second. I think I already talked about this in Roundup, so I'll just skim through this really quick. But Steve's was awesome, and it had some real tips that you could use if you want to start working on this stuff yourself. And I say that because very often when we deep dive into this stuff, we kind of skip over the beginner things. And it was really cool watching Steve jump into that. But also it was kind of fun to see, when live stuff happens, things always go wrong. And the panel before ran late, which was nobody's fault. This wasn't a big deal or anything, but Steve thought he was going to have a specific amount of time, and then he had to scramble really fast to set up and rush to get started. And I think some of the fun things that happened as a result made the panel more fun. And I certainly learned some stuff, and everybody had some laughs, not at Steve, but with Steve. Although Steve and I are both the type that if you're laughing at us, that's fine too. But it wasn't like that at all. We were all kind of laughing together and enjoying ourselves. So that was good. In my panel, I had something completely different planned that fell through at basically the last minute. So I was like, okay, I've been doing these things for decades now because I also did panels and was on booths for my old job too. And I was like, I think I could come up with something really cool in the moment. And it was so much better than I ever thought of. I was able to get people up that I didn't expect to even come up and do a panel, such as Jamie, aka Risha from the Mr. FPGA team. But also, I had met Clint from LGR like less than 24 hours before. And I just went right up to him and started talking to him and, said I was a fan and told him, hey, you got a great reputation. Everybody in the scene's got something nice to say about you. Want to do a panel with me tomorrow? And I was half expecting, like half joking, half expecting him to be like, oh, I don't know. I didn't really prepare anything. And he was like, yeah, sure. So we really did have like an all-star panel of some awesome people up there just answering crazy questions. But those were the two people that certainly surprised me because I was just, I wasn't expecting to have so many amazing people there, not just the core group that you would have expected to be there. There so many more people stepped up and really helped, and the people that were also in the crowd, there were some crazy developers in there and some famous people. So it was nuts, and I attribute all of this to them, not me. So I was just up there. I think Chris accidentally cut off the beginning, but the beginning of that panel was me basically just fanboying over everybody who was in the room and just talking about how lucky I was to be there and how appreciative I was. So yeah, that both are good panels. I enjoyed both, and I hope that I get to be invited back again next year and that we could go even bigger next year. I have a feeling next year is going to be a pretty big deal. So I don't know. It's almost a year away, so I'm not going to start hyping it quite yet until things are more solidified. But I'm aiming for this one to be the expo of 2025. So we'll see. Next up, Reagan Kelly wanted to follow up on the discussion of the Sega Saturn 10-pin mini-DIN replacement, and it turns out the ones on AliExpress are the ones that are being used in all the different Mr. kits, and Reagan had some fit issues with the cables, which I had heard a few people talk about before. Now, I have 5 or 6 cables here, and I've used 10 different versions of the Mr. cases with that on there, and I haven't had any issues. Now, I don't like saying stuff like that because that's like saying I've been smoking for 30 years and I don't have cancer, so smoking doesn't cause cancer. Like, I don't like statements like that at all. But I will say that I didn't notice anything that jumped out immediately. Maybe the first couple times I plugged it in, it was a little snug, but I've had normal DIN connectors that were properly made that are the same way. They kind of have a little bit of a break-in period. And I certainly don't have any issues where if you touch the cable, you drop signal. That's always an indication. So I don't know if we're slowly killing these DINs, slowly bending our cables, or if it really is just going to kind of settle into place and be fine. It's it's going to be up to you to decide if you want to replace the DIN on your Saturn or if you want to use these. For me personally, I think it's worth the risk because if you replace this DIN, well, first of all, if you don't have a DIN to replace it with, you're not going to be able to use your Saturn. But also, if you have to buy 2 and replace the DIN every 10 years or replace your cable every 10 years, it's not the end of the world. It's not the best practice. And if there were any options available, I would be recommending that. But I think the problem is that there are no other options. And spinning up production on an exact Sega Saturn replica mini-DIN, you have to make them in quantities of like probably 50,000 in order for anybody to do that. So, you would have to put down an insane amount of money to be able to make those. So I completely understand why those aren't being made. Reagan also suggested another possible solution of maybe using an 8-pin DIN instead, but I don't like that at all. I've always been very against changing the output connector in signals of consoles. Permanently changing. Like plug-and-play adapters are completely different. That's fine. But I think people very often forget that you don't live forever and you might not even be into this hobby forever. So somebody else is going to get this console at some point and go, oh, Saturn cable doesn't fit. And they're going to open it up and go, could have just been hacked. And that very likely might go in the garbage. And I talked a lot about this with the Sega triple bypass, because if you remove composite video, somebody might plug in a composite video cable, not get signal, and think the console's trash, when in actuality, if it was done right, it's highly upgraded. So I always recommended people put stickers on it. Zaxor came up with I think a few people, but Zaxor's designs were the ones that really implemented the putting composite video back in, which I loved. I think that's an excellent idea. So it's stuff like that longevity is really important. So if you don't have any other solution, I mean, maybe you could do something like solder wires to remove the original DIN, solder wires to the points on the motherboard, run those wires out the back of the console, and have some strain relief, put up some zip ties or something, and then have an external DIN, whether it's an 8-pin or something else, and then just, tie a little sticker to the end of it or something that says, this is a Saturn that uses a Sega Genesis MiniDIN or something. And I think that would be okay. But I think doing any kind of permanent mod to the console or anything like that changes the output connector is probably not a good idea. And I don't even like changing signals unless it's really necessary. And in fact, the only reason I even I was okay with disabling composite video from the triple bypass on the Sega Genesis models was because it still outputted sync on composite video, which means every RGB or component video cable you plug into it would still work. The only thing that wouldn't work is actual composite video. So that was like a gray area that I let that go just because, at the time there were no FPGA alternatives. So if you wanted to use original Genesis hardware, there was a lot of compromise. So yeah, I don't know. That's if you want to do that, by all means. I just wanted to share my opinions just because. Next up, Andre Coelho wants to know if anybody could share their experience with the Mega EverDrive Pro and Wondermega consoles. Theirs reads Japanese Mega Drive cartridges just fine, but with the Mega EverDrive Pro, it just says that the I/O core needs an update. If they press the A button to perform the update, it reboots and says the same thing. If they take it out and put it in another console, it's working fine. I asked Crix, and he said it should work as far as he knows, but maybe the console isn't working properly. And he could have a point. They're still in the process of restoring the unit and the Mega CD side of it, and it still freezes in the BIOS animation, so that could be throwing it off. They'll have to try to disconnect it and test with just the Mega Drive side in isolation. Regardless, if anybody has this experience, please do share. So the only thing I can add is the Mega EverDrive Pro might not always work on any console that has the Sega CD built in, like the CDX, the Wondermega, the XI, same thing. So, you might always run into something like that. However, I think one of the ways that it does work is by waiting for some kind of Sega CD check to know to bypass it. So that could be it. But I agree with Andre. If anybody else out there already has this experience, it could just save Andre a lot of time. Maybe it's like, oh yeah, if you don't need the CD side, remove resistor 1, 2, 3, and just make sure to put it back if you ever want to restore it. Like maybe there's a trick like that. So if anybody has any info on the Wondermega and the Mega EverDrive Pro, please chime in the comments if you have the ability to. Next up, Rent Optional ordered a Taki Mr. Pie, and it should arrive in a few days after it was originally marked Return to Sender. Apparently, they messed up several shipments where they forgot to include certain things in the box, but those units did go back out to customers, so nobody got screwed over at all as far as I know. Everybody got theirs, so I wanted to shout out the good part of things, because mistakes happen, but when companies make it right, my strong opinion is that's what you should focus on. So Taki made that right for people. But anyway, there's currently no purchasable case for it. Taki's making one, and I believe Todd is working on one as well. Is it safe to use without a case for a few weeks while waiting for one to be made? They have no way of printing their own and can't pay someone to make it, since the design template license isn't commercial. So first of all, it's 100% safe to use without a case. You just have to be reasonable about it. If you're carrying a bag of small screws next to it while it's on, it's probably not the best idea in case you drop it and the screws go firing into it. But if you just have it on top of your desk, on top of your CRT or whatever, just, away from where things could fall in to short it out, then it's 100% safe to use. Also, I believe Taki mentioned that he was going to be making those clear cases available for basically free, just for shipping for anybody who purchased from the first batch or something. So if you wanted one of those, you could just wait until that becomes available. But yes, it is completely safe to have a case with these things. have no case with these things. And that's a very fair question, because there are some electronics that are only designed to be used in a case, because the case provides the proper airflow in the direction that it needs to be to cool all of the components. So it is a very valid question. It's not just a safety issue, but no, these things should be completely fine to use caseless. I've personally used them caseless for, the original DE10s for a long time, especially benchtop stuff like that. So good question, but you should be good to go. And there should be a lot more options popping up in the next month or two for a case for this case and IO boards for it. Well, it looks like it was a short one this week, but honestly, I try to always make these as long as they need to be. So sometimes there's a lot of questions, sometimes there aren't many questions, but those require a lot more detailed answers. So basically, sometimes these things are going to be short, sometimes I'm going to drone on for over an hour about stuff, and I try to always just make it flow as nicely as possible. But if you'd like to ask any question whatsoever, just please do it wherever you support in the latest Q&A post. Because the way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through in real time and answering the questions as if we were hanging out somewhere together. So, as always, thank you to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping this stuff going. So, thanks, and I will see you next week.